And now another Norwegian folk tale entitled The Seven Ponies. Once a man and his wife had 3 sons. 2 were fine, sensible lads, but the youngest, Askalad, never did anything except sit in front of the fire poking at the ashes. They were very poor and seldom had enough to eat. One day, the eldest boy told his parents that he was going to leave home and look for work elsewhere. Sadly, the mother and father waved him farewell. He walked all day, and by nightfall he had arrived at the fine farm. It belonged to the king. The king himself was standing in the courtyard. "Where are you going, lad?" he asked. "I'm looking for work, master," answered the boy. "Would you like to work for me?" asked the king. "I would," answered the boy. "Do you think you could look after my 7 ponies?" asked the king. "Oh, I'm sure I could," answered the boy. He was well used to caring for animals. The king smiled sadly. "Perhaps," he said. "Now, if you can watch over them carefully for a whole day, and tell me at the end of it what they've eaten and drunk, I will give you my daughter for a wife, and half of my kingdom to rule over." "That's very good pay," said the boy, thinking how lucky he had been to come that way. "Wait," said the king. "If you should fail, you'll be whipped until 3 strips of your skin are torn from your back." Well, that wasn't so good, but the boy laughed. He was sure he could watch the ponies for a day, and so he agreed to the bargain. Early next morning, as soon as the sun shone in his face, over the side of the hill, the 7 ponies were let out of the stable. They galloped away with the boy running hard behind them. They galloped over the hill and down the dale, but the boy kept going. On and on they raced. The boy kept up, but he was tiring fast and his legs beginning to ache. "I shall lose them soon," he panted. "I can't keep this up for much longer." He was passing a big cliff at the time. In the cleft of the cliff he saw an old woman spinning. "Come here, lad," she called. "Come to me a minute." The boy was bathed in sweat. He was glad to give up on the chase and to go and sit by the old woman. She took his head on her knee and gently combed his hair. It was pleasant to sit in that warm, comfortable spot and not worry about anything, and before he realized it, the day had gone and the night was falling. He sat up and remembered his work. "I may as well go straight back home," he said. "I've lost the king's 7 ponies and I'm too scared to go back to the farm." "Don't worry, lad," the old woman comforted him. "Wait until it's a little darker. The 7 ponies will pass here on their way back. You can run behind them. Nobody will know that you've spent the day here with me." "But I must tell the king what they have eaten and drunk." The boy was still worried. "Here," said the old woman. She handed him a tussock of moss and a bottle of water. "When the king asks, give him these and tell him that's what they've had." The boy breathed a deep sigh of relief. He thanked the old woman and listened for the ponies. At last, when it was pitch dark, he heard them racing past the cliff, and he tagged on behind them as soon they arrived back at the king's farm. "Well," the king greeted him, "did you watch carefully over my ponies?" "Indeed I did," lied the boy. "Tell me, how have they fed?" The boy showed him the water and the moss. "You've lied to me," the king said, cold and angry. "There is no work on my farm for such as you." And he ordered the boy to be whipped, and salt was rubbed into his wounds, and then he was sent home. He arrived home tired, unhappy, and determined never to go back and seek work again. The next day, the 2nd son told his parents that he was going out into the world to look for work. They were not willing to let him go. "Look at your brother's back," they said. "Is that what you want?" But he was determined, so sadly they waved him farewell. He walked all day, and by evening he'd arrived at the king's farm. The king was in the courtyard. "Where are you going, lad?" asked the king. "I'm looking for work," said the second boy. "Would you like to look after my 7 ponies?" "I would." "Remember, you must wash them carefully, and tell me what they've eaten and drunk during the day." "I will." The king offered him the same reward for good work as he had offered his brother, and he warned him about the punishment. The boy accepted the conditions gladly, because he was sure he could do the work easily. Very early the next morning the 7 ponies were let out of the stable. They galloped away over the mountains and the meadow with the boy racing hard at their heels, but, like his brother, he became very tired, and by the time they came to the cleft in the rock, he felt ready to drop. The old woman was there still, spinning. "Come here, lad, come over here," she called. The boy went, glad of an excuse to sit down and rest. The ponies galloped away, but the boy didn't care. He laid his head on the old woman's lap, and she combed his hair. Time passed quickly. Night came, and it was not until he heard the sound of the ponies' hooves returning that he stirred himself. "What shall I say to the king," he said, "when he asks me what they've been feeding on?" "Give him these," said the old woman, pushing a handful of moss and a bottle of water in his pocket. The boy sighed in his relief and raced after the ponies. The king was waiting in the courtyard. He watched while the ponies were stabled, and then he asked the boy what they'd eaten and drunk during the day. The boy showed him the water and the moss. "This is what they've drunk," he said, "and this is what they've eaten." "You've lied to me," said the king. "You must suffer your punishment." The boy was whipped. The salt was rubbed into his wheels, and he was sent home sadder and wiser. He told his parents what had happened, and swore he would not go away again. Askeladd, the youngest son, had listened to the story, and now he piped up from his stool near the fire. "I think I'd like to go out into the world to look for work." They all laughed at him. "If we've failed, what hope do you have of succeeding?" said the brothers. "You've never done anything except sit in front of the fire, toasting yourself, and poking about in the ashes." "I'm going anyway," said Askeladd. "I've made up my mind." His parents tried to persuade him to stay, and his brothers tried to laugh him out of it, but off he went in the morning. He arrived at the king's farm as dusk was gathering, and the king was in the courtyard. "Where have you come from?" said the king. Askeladd told him. He told him, too, that his brothers had tried to look after the ponies, but had failed. "If you're a brother of those two lying layabouts," said the king, "there is no work here for you." "I've come a long way," pleaded Askeladd. "Please give me a chance." "Well," sighed the king, "if you want to lose the skin off your back like they did, I don't care." "I think I would prefer to win the princess," said Askeladd, grinning. But the king had already turned his back on him and gone inside the house. At daybreak, the 7 ponies were let out of the stable. Away they went, racing swiftly over the slope and hollow, with Askeladd following close behind. After running for some time, and when perspiration was dripping from his forehead and burning on his eyelashes, he came to the cleft in the crag. The old woman was still spinning. "Come here, lad. Come by me." "I've no time today," Askeladd shouted back, grasping the tail of the nearest pony and running as hard as he could. When they were safely past the cliff, the pony told Askeladd to jump on his back, because they still had a long way to go. Askeladd was surprised to hear the pony talking, but he jumped up, and away they went, racing like the wind. After covering many kilometres, the pony spoke again. "What do you see?" he said. "Nothing but the ground beneath us and the sky above us," answered Askeladd. On they went. And then the pony asked again, "What do you see?" "I can see something white," answered Askeladd, straining his eyes. "I think it's a birch tree." "We will go there," said the pony. And they reached the tree, and the eldest pony pushed against it until it fell. Behind it was a strong wooden door. They opened the door and went into a small room. In the room they saw a fire and some stools. Askeladd noticed that behind the door there was a sword hanging on a hook, and below the sword there was a pitcher. "Can you reach down the sword?" said the pony. "I can try," said Askeladd. He stretched up and tried to unhook the sword, but it was too heavy. He couldn't move it. "Take a drink from the pitcher," said the pony. Askeladd took a little sip from the pitcher and then reached for the sword again. This time he was able to move it a little bit. He took a deep drink from the pitcher, and then another, and then another. Every sip made him stronger. At last the sword was safely in his hands. "You are to bring it with you," said the pony, "and on your wedding day you must cut off our heads with it." Oh my gosh, Askeladd was very surprised, but he promised to do as the pony asked. They left the little room and travelled on further. After many kilometres the pony said, "What do you see?" "Nothing except the ground and the sky," said Askeladd. On and on they went, and the pony asked again, "What do you see?" "I think," said Askeladd, peering into the distance, "that I can see a blue line far away." "That's the river," said the pony. "We must cross that." They reached the river, where it was crossed by a long, narrow bridge. They galloped over the bridge and travelled on. "What do you see?" said the pony. Askeladd stared ahead. "I think," he said, "I can see the tower of a church." "We'll go to the church," said the pony. As soon as the ponies had crossed into the churchyard, they changed into 7 princes. "We are the sons of the king and the brothers of the princess," explained the eldest. "A wicked goblin laid a spell on us, turning us into ponies. The only way to break the spell is for you to tell the king what we have eaten and drunk, and then, when you marry our sister, to cut off our heads with a special sword. But you must be careful to lay each head at the tail of the right body. If you do that, the spell will be broken." Askeladd was amazed, but he followed them inside the church. They took bread and wine from the priest at the altar, and then the priest blessed the 7 princes. Askeladd took a piece of bread and a small bottle of wine too, but he kept them in his pocket. As soon as they crossed out of the churchyard, the princes became ponies again. Askeladd jumped on the back of the youngest pony, and away they went along the same way as they'd come. They crossed the long bridge, past the wooden door behind the tree, and past the cleft in a crag where the old woman was still spinning. She saw them and shouted at them. They were travelling too quickly for Askeladd to make out what she was saying, but he could tell from the tone of her voice that she was furious and angry. It was dark when they arrived back at the king's farm. The king was waiting for them in the courtyard. "Have you watched carefully over my 7 ponies all day?" he said. "I've done my best," answered Askeladd. "What have they eaten and drunk?" asked the king. Askeladd took the bread from his pocket. "Here is their food." And then he handed the king a little bottle of wine. "And this is what they have drunk." "You have watched carefully and faithfully," said the king. "You will get your reward." He ordered his servants to prepare for the wedding of his daughter to Askeladd. It took place the very next day, and was the grandest that had ever been seen in the country. But while they were feasting, Askeladd left the table. "I've forgotten something," he said. He went to the stables and cut off the heads of the ponies with a special sword. He was careful about laying the heads near the tails of the right bodies, and as he did so, each pony became a prince again. When Askeladd returned to the feast, he was accompanied by the 7 princes. The king was delighted. The princess was delighted. Everyone was very happy. The king said, "You have received half of my kingdom today. When I die, you may have the other half. My sons can go and win lands for themselves now that the spell is broken." The fun and feasting increased even more. "I know all about it because I was there and saw it all, although nobody noticed me. All I received at the feast was a slice of rye bread and a dab of butter. I put them on the mantelpiece and forgot all about them until the butter had melted away and the bread had dried to a crisp."